Hi everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome back. In today's video, we are going to be creating a card using some emboss resist and some layered die cutting to create some dimension in our sentiment. So I have a bunch of new products here from the February release. So we're going to be using the Wish Die-namics, which is the word wish, but instead of the letter I, it has a candle, so it's a lot of fun. And then I also have the Anything But Basic Birthday Wishes stamp set, which has a ton of different birthday sentiments with a fun text and scripty font combined. And then I also have the musical notes background stamp. And this is kind of like sheet music, but it has kind of a bouncy pattern to it. So the music notes are kind of all over in a wavy pattern. I love this background stamp so much, and I will probably be using it in a lot of card designs. So for this card, I want to create a strip across the center of my panel. So this is a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card. And what I want to do is I want to be able to have some emboss resist with some rainbow distress ink across that panel, but I only want it about 2 inches high. So what I've done is I've taken a piece of Post-it note tape and I've added it to the top of the panel, and I just used my grid mat underneath of me to do that and line it up perfectly straight. And then I also added another strip at the bottom, so it leaves me with an open area in the middle of this panel, and that's where I want to emboss this background stamp. Now, since I don't have the whole panel fully covered, so the bottom area is still exposed, I'm just being careful to only stamp in that open area at the top, in between the two strips of tape. So I'm taking some Versamark ink and I'm just applying that to the bottom area of the stamp, since I don't need the full stamped area to do the stamping that I want to do. And I'm just going to bring my cardstock panel directly to the stamp and make sure that when I position it, I have it just in the top area and that I'm only going to get the stamping where I want it. I'm just going to use my fingers to firmly press the cardstock panel into the stamp so that I can transfer all of that Versamark ink over to the panel. And then I'm going to add some white embossing powder. Now, I did have a little bit of black ink left on the stamp, so you can kind of see that a little bit in the stamping, but you're not going to see that at all once we're finished, so I didn't worry too much about that. So I have my Wow Opaque White Embossing Powder, and I'm just adding that to the center area of this panel. And I'm just doing it over a coffee filter so I can quickly and easily funnel that back into the container once I'm done with it. And then I took it off screen and heat embossed it. It's kind of hard to see in this lighting, I apologize, but you can kind of see it there now that I have it on my work surface. And when I did the embossing, I ended up removing that tape before I heat set it. So I needed to add 2 more strips back onto it because I want to add ink now. And I want to make sure I'm only applying the ink in the same area that I've done the embossing. So I just used my grid mat once again and lined up the panel and then added the 2 strips of the Post-it tape. So now that I have the tape on there, I can go ahead and do my inking. So I want to create a rainbow effect straight across this whole strip here. And rather than start off with a really bright red, which I usually do, I decided to start with Picked Raspberry. And then I worked into Abandoned Coral, which is not typically a red color that I use, but I wanted to kind of have it a little bit more toned down and not have that bright red at the beginning of the rainbow. Once I did the Abandoned Coral, I moved on to Carved Pumpkin and Squeezed Lemonade. And then I'm going to move into some greens here. So when I go from yellow to green, I like to start with Twisted Citron first, just because it's a little bit of a lighter green, and I find it blends a little bit better with the yellow. And then I'm going to go into a darker green, which is the Mauve Lawn, to really intensify that green color. I'm going to finish off the panel with some peacock feathers for the blue aqua color. And then I'm going to put a very tiny bit of Wilted Violet right there in the bottom just to add a little bit of that purple. But the Wilted Violet can be quite dark, so I tend to kind of use as little of that as possible since I don't want it to overpower the design. And then once we have the inking done, we can move on to my favorite part, which is where we remove the tape and see the final result. So I very carefully peeled that off, and now you can see we have this perfect stripe across the card panel, and it has this embossed detail with the music notes, and then we have this really fun rainbow pattern in the background with the distress inks. Now what I want to do is I want to die cut the word wish, and I want it to die cut half between the distress area and then half of the white area underneath. So I want it to kind of disappear into that inked area that we have when we put all of the die cut pieces back together. So I just positioned the die exactly where I wanted it and used my T-square ruler to make sure I had it straight. And then I ran that through my die cutting machine. And you can see when I pull the letters out, I have the inked and embossed detail at the very top of the letters, and then I have the white at the very bottom. And we're going to use those on the very top of our stacked die cut sentiment once we have all of our letters glued together. Now this part here does take a little bit of time because you want to die cut the word a few times. So I have it die cut 4 times from white cardstock, and then I die cut it twice from black. And then I'm going to use liquid glue and I'm going to glue all of these letters together so that I have some really great dimension, because it's going to form a really thick letter and kind of mimic the look of chipboard. So it's kind of a cool effect and a great way to add dimension to a card. So I have this quite sped up a bit because it's just simply gluing one letter on top of another, and it does, like I mentioned, take a little bit of time to do this, but I definitely think the overall effect is well worth it. So what I did is I glued the 4 white together and added the very top piece on top of that where the inking and the distress ink is. And then I also glued together the 2 black W's. So I have everything kind of up there glued together, ready to go. But before I start to add them into the card and create that dimension, I want to stamp the secondary sentiment underneath. And I want to do this first just so that I don't have any problem of my acrylic block kind of interfering with those raised letters once I adhere them. So I used the Anything But Basic Birthday Wishes stamp set and stamped my sentiment in black ink underneath the word wish. And now I'm adding adhesive to the entire back of this panel, and I'm making sure to take my liquid glue and add that all around the word wish so that all of the entire background completely adheres to my top folding card base. And then I just adhered that on there so that I have a base to glue my letters onto. So I'm just finishing the stacking of my letters by adding my grouping of white W's to the 2 black ones that I had glued together. And then I have a nice thick die cut piece here, and I have 2 layers of black at the bottom. And what that's going to do is it's going to provide a tiny bit of a shadow when we inlay this back into the opening where the W is. And it's just going to kind of help that word stand out a little bit more, since it is going to fade back into the background since we've die cut that directly from there. So you can see when I add this in here, it fits just like a puzzle. But because we have all of that dimension and those layers and the black underneath, it really makes this W pop off of the card and really stand out as a focal sentiment. Now, I don't want to bore you with me doing all of this gluing of all of these letters, so I am just going to go ahead and jump ahead. You just want to repeat the process for every letter. So you want to glue all of the 4 white pieces, the 2 black pieces, the very top layer, and then glue everything together before adhering them into the opening. And now you can see I have this entire word fully completed. And we have so much great dimension here. I love the look of this, and I love that it blends into the background and is completely cohesive on the finished design. I decided, since it is pretty plain, I mean, we have a lot of color and the embossing and the letters, but I felt like it definitely needed some sequins, especially because it is a birthday card, so we want to make it sparkly and shiny. So I added some clear sequins and filled the centers of those with sprinkled sugar distress ink, which is just kind of a clear distress ink that almost looks like sugar when it dries. And then that is going to complete our card. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got some ideas for creating some fun dimension with your sentiments. Thanks so much for joining me in today's video, and I will see you in another one soon. Thanks for watching.